right, let's dive into something interesting. Imagine a tree, it just trees, right? Or a flower, it's simply flowers, just going through the motions. But are we humans really that different? Are we just cruising on autopilot?
That's the question Ernie Vecchio tackles in his work.
A tree trees, a flower flowers, and you just one of those, right?
Yeah, and he really digs deep into what it means to be human, especially now with all the noise and distractions in the world today.
It's like he's asking, are we really in control or just along for the ride?
Exactly. He doesn't shy away from the big stuff either. Identity, societal pressures, even our egos.
Ooh, yeah, that ego can be a touchy subject.
Definitely. But one of the most fascinating things Vecchio points out is this unique human ability to reinvent ourselves. Like we're constantly striving for something different, always reimagining who we could be.
You see that everywhere. People saying, I'm on this journey or I'm reinventing myself. Like, I remember when I got super into sourdough bread baking, I was determined to bake the perfect loaf.
The quest for the perfect loaf, huh? It's funny you mention that. It actually links perfectly to what Vecchio's getting at. He'd ask, did that desire to bake come from a genuine place? Or was it, say, influenced by all those perfect sourdough pictures online? Did it come at a cost, like maybe you neglected other hobbies or felt overwhelmed by it? Was it worth it?
Wow, I never thought about it like that. It's like he's making me question everything I do.
And speaking of questioning, Vecchio also dives into this whole idea of self-awareness. He's a bit skeptical about whether people are truly self-aware,
And why is that?
It ties into something he calls ego dysfunction. This idea that we can be so focused on ourselves, on me, myself, and I, that we lose sight of our impact on others.
So it's like our desire for self-improvement, which seems positive on the surface, might actually have a downside if it's not coming from the right place.
Right. He's not saying self-improvement is bad, but he's pushing us to really examine our motives. Are we trying to be better or just seeking external validation? It's a question worth pondering, don't you think?
Definitely. And it's not just our own internal struggles. Vecchio also highlights how external stuff shapes us, language, culture, even just comparing ourselves to others. We might not even realize how much it affects us.
Absolutely. He argues that these influences, while seemingly harmless, can get twisted by what he calls a dysfunctional collective ego. Imagine a society where success is super narrow, defined only by external achievements. That's a dysfunctional collective ego at work.
So basically, these warped ideas about what's normal can trickle down and mess with our own sense of self, our desires, our goals, and even our fears.
Exactly. And one of the most potent examples is how cultural narratives like myths and stories shape our understanding of the world.
It's like we're swimming in a sea of cultural expectations without even realizing it, which can lead to some pretty distorted views of success, happiness, even just being normal. Vecchio actually says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says something like, from the moment we're born, we're told stories that shape how we see the world and our place in it. But what if those stories are based on competition, lack, and a very limited definition of success?
It makes you wonder about the stories we tell ourselves and each other and the impact they have on us.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure. Our own drives, external pressures, and then these cultural narratives all playing a part. And this is where Vecchio's concern about the potential downside of constantly reimagining ourselves comes in, right?
Precisely. He suggests that while this ability to reinvent ourselves is a uniquely human trait, it can also backfire. If we're constantly chasing the next version of ourselves, the next goal, when do we ever stop and appreciate who we are right now?
And when do we stop to consider how this striving impacts others or the world around us? It's not just about individual growth, but about understanding what growth even means in a bigger context.
You hit the nail on the head. And that's where his idea of being humane comes into play. He makes a distinction between simply surviving and actually being humane.
He even says humans aren't just meant to survive, but to be humane.
That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. You think people might disagree with that? Isn't survival the most basic instinct for any living thing?
It is. But Vecchio seems to be saying that there's something more to us than just survival. Our ability to connect, feel empathy, show compassion, that's what allows us to truly thrive, not just exist.
So there's a difference between just existing and truly embracing what it means to be humane.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that connection to something bigger than ourselves, that shared human experience, and then acting with compassion.
Which can be tough, let's be real. It's easy to get caught up in our own little worlds.
It is. Vecchio doesn't pretend it's easy. He talks about individualism, materialism, even just the constant exposure to violence and suffering, especially through media.
It's true. It's like we're surrounded by negativity. Sometimes even just scrolling through the news is enough to bum you out. I actually had to take a break from social media. It's just too much.
That feeling of being overwhelmed, I think a lot of people can relate to that. Vecchio argues that this constant negativity, these, and I'm using his words here, dehumanizing influences, they chip away at our ability to feel compassion. Like if you're bombarded with images of suffering or always hearing about conflict, it's easy to become numb to it.
And when you're numb, you become apathetic. Like, why even bother? The world's a mess anyway.
Exactly. And that's a dangerous path to go down for everyone involved. Because when we lose empathy, when we lose that sense of outrage at injustice, that's when things really start to fall apart.
Okay, so how do we fight against that? How do we hold on to that compassion, that sense of humanity, when it feels like everything's trying to pull us in the opposite direction?
Well, Vecchio believes it starts with awareness. He's a big proponent of mindfulness, taking a step back, paying attention to our thoughts and feelings, examining our own biases.
So you're saying, like, noticing when we judge others or make assumptions about their experiences, basically forgetting that they're complex human beings just like us.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's about questioning those automatic reactions, those pre-programmed responses, and choosing empathy instead. He believes a lot of the problems we face as a society stem from this lack of understanding, this us versus them mentality.
So we need to break down those walls we build between each other, recognize that we're all in this together. Easier said than done, am I right? I know sometimes I get stuck in my own little bubble. It's comfortable.
It's human nature to stick to what we know, to surround ourselves with people who are like us. But Vecchio challenges us to step outside of that, to actively seek out different perspectives, even when it's uncomfortable.
So you mean like actually having conversations with people who have different opinions, different backgrounds, different experiences, even when it feels awkward?
Exactly. He believes that's where true growth, both personal and societal, comes from. Embracing that discomfort, questioning everything we thought we knew.
He even talks about reimagining our identities.
He does. It's like he's saying, don't just accept the labels you've been given or even the ones you give yourself. Question them, explore them, figure out what it truly means to be you.
So basically recognizing that we're not static, we're always evolving and growing and changing, and that's okay.
It's more than, okay, it's essential. Because if we're not willing to change, to evolve our perspectives, how can we expect the world around us to change?
So it's like we're all responsible for rewriting our own stories, and when we do that, we contribute to a larger rewrite of our collective story as humans.
That's the idea. But it takes work. We can't just sit back and expect things to magically change. We have to be the change.
I get that, but it can feel impossible sometimes. Where do you even start? It feels like everywhere you look, it's all about competition and achievement and hustle culture, like this constant pressure to be better, but better than what? What does that even mean?
It's true, those messages are everywhere. Vecchio would say those messages come from this mindset of scarcity.
Yeah.
This idea that there's not enough to go around, not enough success, not enough happiness, not enough resources.
So because we think there's not enough of anything, we start competing and comparing ourselves to others. We see each other as rivals instead of allies.
Exactly. And that fear that we won't be enough or have enough, it drives so much of the negativity and the competition.
So how do we escape that? How do we move from that feeling of scarcity to something more positive, something that connects us instead of dividing us?
He suggests we start by just noticing those messages we've internalized, those subtle things that keep us in that scarcity mindset. Like, are you always comparing yourself to others, feeling like you're not good enough, always afraid of missing out? Those could be signs that you've absorbed that scarcity narrative without even realizing it.
It's like we're all running these mental scripts that we didn't even write. Someone else gave them to us, our families, society, the media, whatever. And these scripts, they're just playing on repeat in our heads, influencing everything we do.
Exactly. So we have to become aware of those scripts. First step is just noticing them, shining a light on them. And then Vecchio says we can start questioning them. Like, is this belief really true? And is this how I want to see the world?
So we can actually choose which story we want to believe. We can rewrite our own narratives.
You got it. It's about taking back that control, but it's not always easy. There will always be those external pressures, those messages from the outside that try to pull you back into that scarcity mindset.
What do we do when that happens? When we encounter all that negativity and cynicism out in the world, the stuff that tells us it's a dog-eat-dog world and that we need to be looking out for, number one.
That's when we have to make a choice to resist those messages, to not let them to MA. Vecchio believes every interaction we have is a chance to change the script. We can reinforce those old ways of thinking, or we can choose something new, something more compassionate.
So instead of getting sucked into all the negativity, we can choose to act with kindness. We can choose understanding, choose to look for the good in others, even when it's hard.
That's it. We always have a choice in every single moment. We can choose fear or love. We can choose cynicism or hope. We can see each other as separate or as part of something much bigger than ourselves.
So even though Vecchio's work explores a lot of heavy stuff, it ultimately comes down to hope. It's about remembering that we have the power to create positive change.
Absolutely. He wants us to remember that we're not just along for the ride. We're active participants. We have the power to change the narrative for ourselves and for future generations.
And that power comes from choosing compassion, from connecting with each other, from choosing kindness, even when things are difficult.
That's what it's all about. It's not about being perfect. It's about making the effort to live in a way that reflects what we truly value.
That's a powerful message to end on. So as you go about your day, your week, your life, remember that you have that power. You can choose kindness. You can choose to connect with others. You can be the change you want to see. And yeah, it might feel small, but like Vecchio reminds us, even the smallest acts of compassion can have huge ripple effects that we may never even see.